Nice. Okay. All right. So I am back. All right. So it's been a while. So thanks for being here. It's been a while. I'm totally screwing my setup up. All right. Cool. So yeah, it's been a while. So thanks for joining me. I've got a few things to say. In about a few things. So I apologize for being gone for so long. I got sick. And then after I got sick, I had a series of interviews and I got a new job. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so behind, I guess, on what's going on with my videos. So just FYI, I appreciate the back and forth I've gotten from many of you on Twitter and on YouTube. So thank you for that. The next thing is, before I get into the main point of this video, the next thing is the video for the altar boys and priest ordination. It will go as planned, even though I wasn't able to get a Kickstarter. Apparently, Kickstarter doesn't like YouTube video stuff. I don't know. It ended up getting rejected, even though it clearly fits within journalism. And so that got rejected. But if you want to donate to help with it, you can donate on the channel. There's like super thanks, or you can become a member on the channel. That will go towards pulling the data. So yeah, Damien, you haven't missed anything. I haven't actually said anything about the title of the video. So I'm just catching up on what's going on. But the point, I guess the last point that I'm going to say is, if I can't raise the $750 to get that data pull from Kara, there are other ways I'm going to approximate that statistic to move along with it, because I can't just sit on it. I need to present it and put it out there, because it is becoming by the day a problem that isn't a focus at all, in a variety of ways. So sorry. So all right, so getting back to the main topic at hand. Thank you for letting me derail that for a second. So I'm responding specifically to the video Ben Shapiro put out about the new Catholic movie Conclave. And so Conclave has a situation where, a typical conclave happens, right? Like there's a back and forth, based off of what Ben Shapiro said. There's a back and forth, and then there's a presentation of this Pope, and this Pope is genetically a woman. And so Ben Shapiro said in his review that the people who were establishing the Pope as the Pope, like getting things ready and such, knew the Pope was actually a woman. And so it creates this kind of hook at the end of the movie where it's like, oh, and now there's a woman Pope. And so it's like, it's kind of, how do you say, like when he was describing this situation, when he was describing the video, and I guess the book at the same thing, because I guess Dennis, he's in the chat, he read the book, and it was an easy read, but like according to him. And so like it kind of like reminds me of Dan Brown, right? Like Dan Brown, it's a fairly easy read, repetitive in style. Like I don't know if Harris is repetitive in style, but Dan Brown, Angels and Demons, the Da Vinci Code, I mean, like when you read the books, they're fairly like easy to read. They're not at a very high level. Like what you need to know at a very high level is just interpersonal understanding, not the actual like words on the page. But where there's a twist in there, and like you end up finding out all these different things, and oh no, like something happens in the Vatican, and all of a sudden there's a twist at the end. And so like that's kind of the problem with this, right? Like, is that there's a twist at the end and there's a woman pope. The problem is that that actually can't happen. So even if the conclave chooses a woman for a pope, that woman can't actually become a pope. Like, that's just not, it's not possible. So like from a spiritual dimension, like that's just not going to work. But then when it comes to like, all right, people figure it out, like what's going to go on, what's going to happen from there. Well, I would imagine it would be very similar to like the anti-pope movements that have happened in the past, where someone claims to be pope, they're not actually pope. There's like a bunch of reasons as to why that is, and then the cardinals and bishops hash that out, because that's how that worked. So like we actually have a historical precedent of someone has declared something that they shouldn't have been declared, and there's a way for that to get rectified. And so I agree though with Ben Shapiro when he said at the very end, so this is actually, before we go on, there's a fundraiser I want to point up, and my wife knows what that fundraiser is if she's able to post it in the link. It's a fundraiser for a Michigan church, so it's not in the Archdiocese of Detroit, but it's for their bells. They're replacing the bells, and they're asking for donations. And so nobody from that parish has asked me, but the priest is very active in answering a lot of like apologetics online in a lot of forums that my wife's in, and he seems like a pretty solid priest, and that's something I just want to try to help with. So not to derail the explanation, but so with the Catholic themes, like, all right, so like it's a Catholic movie, it looks like sincere like Catholics, and then there's this hook at the end that points towards what, right? What's it point towards? Oh, an agenda. Oh, the modern nihilistic understanding of the world today, right? Like, because the whole angels and demons Dan Brown Da Vinci Code thing was exactly that. It wasn't about, oh, well, this is a spiritual establishment in which something real is going on. So, that isn't okay. In which something real is going on. It's an establishment of men doing things that are archaic, and here's the real thing that's happening, and we just go from there. Like, we treat it as every other institution, and like that's just simply not the case, right? Like the church does not need to be quote unquote modernized. Modern culture sucks. Like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the reason why everybody's doing so well is not because of our attitudes. It's because of our technology. Like, which is a different thing. It's like saying like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know. It's like we have tools that are making our lives easier, and we're taking that easiness, like, and applying it towards like the culture itself, which is just wrong, and it's horrendously materialistic. But how we engage with each other is really like what makes modern culture like suck, right? Like we have a problem with how we interact with each other, and it's not because Christians are having a problem with that. It's because there are people who want to push like certain proclivities, certain mindsets. And I'm not just saying like, okay, I'm not just saying from a standpoint of, what do you call it? From a sexual angle, like libertarians, for example, like generally speaking, like allow certain things to happen that really shouldn't happen. But because they're against regulation, even good regulation, like evil can like persists. And this can take in the form of a lot of things, like, for example, usury, right? Like usury laws are a perfect example of, well, if you accept that that, if you sign it, like, you have to pay that interest rate. I'm like, but the interest rate should never be that high, like, ever. So it's like, that's the problem. Um, uh, if it is a really bad link, post it in the comments if you can, not in the chat. So getting back to it, like, so like we've seen this happen before where there's a book, a very Catholic book, it's being pushed as like, all right, well, this, where there's a hook to the orthodoxy that actually happens, right? Um, the Dan Brown books and the Dan Brown movies. And so what happened when they came out? Did people just ignore them? No, they didn't. Like, there are several people who I've met going to college saying, oh yeah, like Dan Brown talked about that. And it's like, yeah, Dan Brown was wrong. Like, that's like, and like, it's the craziest thing how people will take their cultural cues and history from movies. But we do this all the time. And so it's like, you have this issue of like, and part of that is culture, right? Like, it's the medium in which we consume things. Like, for example, like, maybe not my podcast, but other podcasts where people will listen to a podcaster and take their words as verbatim, as law or as a pretty sound reason, and not validate what they're being told. And it's really important to not fall into that, like, always, I guess, because at the end of the day, like, you can't go around validating everything, right? Like, that's one of the reasons why politics is as bad as it is today, is that that's why politics is as bad as it is today, is because people take advantage of the lack of diligence, that it's not, people are doing like, they're not doing, people are like too busy with life to check every single thing. Like, it's like kind of like the atheist skeptic who says like, oh, well, like, you're just believing that because someone told you. And it's like, yeah, but like all of those scientific studies, like, you check every single one? Like, you don't. Like, it's impossible to do so. Like, you just don't have enough time in the day. And so it's like the same thing here, where it's like, all right, well, Dan Brown, he seems to get a lot of understanding right, but then he throws in his own like twist, right? And so like that, the problem now isn't so much about twisting the religion historically, because that's what Dan Brown seemed to focus on, which was a historical aspect of like Mary Magdalene was actually the wife of Jesus and yada yada, so go, that's how his fan theory goes, right? Like, that's what he wrote about. In this case, though, it seems to be more of a twisting of expectation, and that seems to be the focus there, where it's, again, this is basing it off of, I'm doing a little of what I said earlier, where I haven't read the book, and the movie's coming out in a few weeks, so I haven't like gone out of my way to read the book and validate every single thing he said. But when it comes to prior things that Ben Shapiro has done, he's been right about them in terms of like movies that are coming out. And so, that's how trust is built. So it's like, just, it's a basic thing that we all do, right? Like, and I'm showing you mine, right? Like, I could have a blind spot with movie reviews from Ben Shapiro, right? Like, that entirely could happen. But like, nobody's presented the opposite of that. That's it. Sorry. But no one's presented the opposite of that. And so I'd be open to listening to it if someone did say that. But if what I'm saying is true, based off what he's saying, like, it's another one of those things where an agenda is being put into a video, a movie, to try and compel or influence people who believe to accept this, because they dress it up as a Catholic thing. They dress up the dynamic to be a particular way between, two people vying for the papacy. And then at the very end, well, there's this switch, right? And the person becomes the Pope. And then, oh man, there's that reveal, like it has to be a woman, right? Like it has to be genetically a woman. And so, I'm not saying obviously as a Catholic that we think women are less than men. The highest saint that has hyperdulia is Mary. Like she is the greatest saint within the church. Like that's like not a small thing. So this idea of like we don't like women or whatever is just outdated. It's outplayed, or it's overplayed, because we absolutely do respect women. But like in this case, like they can't be priests, and there's a spiritual complement to the physical reality of women are the only ones that can receive, or that can give birth to life. A man is the only one able to bring out and consecrate the body and blood of Christ. And so there's a spiritual complement to the physical understanding. And let's see. Sorry, I heard this thing in a movie, so like it's true, right? Right. So like that's the problem, is that we have so many people who think that it's appropriate to take movies' word for it, even though the primary reason for that movie, like think about it, it's mostly entertainment, right? Even the historical movies are entertainment. Saving Private Ryan, entertainment. It's a good story. It's a deep story, but it's still like it needs to make money, right? And so 300, so 300's based off a real thing that happened, but it's basically like a graphic novel made into a movie. Let's see. There's plenty of popular fiction on what the church is just listening to Protestants. We don't need more crap movies that continue the line. Well, right. And so like that's like I think the biggest problem I have with like the media angle of the church is that when we get good Catholic movies, it comes from like Mel Gibson, right? Like The Passion of the Christ. It's like one of the best, if not the best, Catholic movie made ever, right? It depicts the central component, the source and summit of our faith, in a very like vivid way to appreciate. Now, like all the other movies that have come out, like you have like The Way, The Way. I have a whole video dedicated to The Way. The Way is a very bad movie. Not because it's inherently bad throughout, but because it promotes something that's forbidden, which is the spreading of ashes of a loved one. And that's quite literally done the entire movie. And so you're not supposed to do that. Now, it promotes a pilgrimage that's really good. That's really good. It promotes a fatherly appreciation for like the son. That's really good. But again, the whole movie, there's a thing that is forbidden for us to do, which is spreading the ashes and then dumping his ashes in the water at the end of that pilgrimage and making it out to be this pious thing. That is the complete opposite of what the church tells us to do. And so like that's not a trivial thing either, because we have family members who do that. Like it's a very big thing the more you like sit and think about what's happening in our culture and what's being promoted. So let's see. So folks don't know where to separate the facts from the fiction anymore. And that's true. So I know like, all right, so like if you want to like comment in the chat and do back and forth, that's cool. It's just I noticed one person is primarily coming back. It's because one person is primarily doing chat, and that's fine. But like when you go and search up baby peacock, for example, go to images, you will probably see more AI than actual photos of baby peacocks. I am talking to you, right? I'm talking to you because you're responding back and forth. But it's so but like it's this understanding though with the media that we are having more and more of a influence from fake things, right? From fantasy. And so fantasy sometimes involves ideologies, right? They involve ways to understand the world and that are being promoted, even if it looks very similar, just like a baby peacock image could be very similar to a real peacock image. But then there's just little twist of colors that they don't quite seem right. The eyes are a little big. The beak is a little long. The tail is shorter than it should be. Like, and you just notice, wait, that's not actually a peacock, or those aren't colors that peacock can actually be. And so, just like that, like there are things that are promoted in the culture, a movie in which the promotion of it is from a perspective that is inherently not Catholic. Like, if that is going to be promoted as again, I'm qualifier here, if it's going to be promoted as an agenda based understanding, right? Like, the church should become more modern. Well, obviously, like this person is the most pious person in the world compared to everyone else vying for the papacy. They should become pope, and then they do become pope. Turns out she's a woman. Like, right? Like that's the problem there, is because if that's the line of reasoning, now what you're doing is you're suggesting, oh, of course a woman has to become pope, or you're giving the implication that a woman is a better pope than the men, and you're trying to twist opinion in that direction. Now, if it's played off as, for example, if it's played off as, hey, like a woman got elected pope, what's the church going to do? And it's an open question, like that is very interesting to talk about, right? Like that's a very interesting thing to talk about. What if we accidentally ordain a man, right? Or I'm sorry, ordained a woman instead of a man for priest, deacon, bishop, pope? Like all of those have ramifications. They all have actions in which would happen. Coincidentally, Father Eric and I did a video talking about this and how just nothing would happen from a spiritual dimension. But then there'd probably be that would eventually come out that this is a woman and she would be declared an anti-pope, or something to that effect, because I don't even know if you can be an anti-pope if like it's not possible for you to be a pope. So oh, I'm so yeah, I've kind of been saying it. Sorry. Um let's see. How do we combat the secular ideologies when the Pope has asked us not to proselytize? So I don't so there seems to be, and this is all right, I'm gonna explain how I've understood that, because proselytization seems to be an understanding of um evangelizing in a coercive way. Whereas like evangelizing is evangelizing, right? Like you're evangelizing through your witness, maybe explanation, and you're not being coercive. Um, that was how it was explained to me. I may be wrong. I am not a theologian, but like that question, your question, Damien, is one question in which I have researched myself, and that's the only understanding I've seen. And if you want to like really dig into this, please do. It's a good question. Don't just take my word for it, because again, I'm not a theologian. Um, but it seems that this is a matter of the Pope is telling us not to coerce people, but promoting authentic evangelization. Now, my follow-up question to that would be to the Pope, if I was in, had his audience and said, okay, well, if that's how it's being understood, I would ask something to the effect of, not as a point of criticism, but as a point of understanding. Where are you seeing that happen? Because again, that's what's been asked. That's what I've found. Researching online through reliable sources, like comparing like Catholic Answers or other reliable places. That's what I've come to the conclusion on with the understanding of proselytization compared to evangelization. I don't think we can ever not evangelize. Like that's a command we're supposed to do. Like, and I live in America, and this idea that we don't have to evangelize in America, it may not be stated like that, but it sure acted that way. Like, oh, we don't need to evangelize in America. Like, we're a Christian nation. Yes, made up of mostly Protestants. Like we're made up of mostly Protestants, and now like what's happening? Oh, IVF is being promoted by Protestants. Now, granted, there are some Catholics that do that, but they're not supposed to. Like, unlike certain Protestant sects, I'm emphasizing certain Protestant sects. There's a lot of nuance that goes completely missed because of what they consider to be essential theology. And so there's a lot of nuance in actions in which they don't play out, and they eventually become a matter, like it leads to a nihilistic culture. It leads to a materialistic culture. Like that's how we're here in the first place is, like history shows pretty convincingly, in my opinion, now I'm emphasizing in my opinion, that if you're Catholic and then you become Protestant as a nation, that you will eventually go atheist. That doesn't always happen. It happens a lot, though. And Europe is a great example of that. So it's not a matter of like, Catholics and Protestants. Like, I don't want to give the idea that Protestants themselves are inherently evil. That's not what I'm saying. But the theology tends towards that angle. Because you water down the faith. When you water down the faith, people step way easier because now you're not giving them the substance that should be there, and they're just saying, yeah, I can get this somewhere else, and that's what they do, is they just go somewhere else. So I hope I answered that, Damien, because at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of ways you can combat, like, so just to pop you back up again, like, there's a lot of ways you can combat secular ideologies. Like, I have 5 kids, and I'm raising them to be Catholic, and I'm so aware of what you're talking about, like, that I am critical of the private Catholic school they go to because of that. Like I want my kids to be raised Catholic. I don't want my kids raised to be like busy or watered down, with a watered down understanding of what's going. Like, today's the anniversary of Our Lady of the Rosary. We went and did a living rosary today, and on the way there, we listened to the Battle of Lepanto by Conclave de Profundi, which if you've never seen it or heard it, it's great. And it's about the Battle of Lepanto, which is where Our Lady of the Rosary comes from, where the Catholic forces were praying to Our Lady as they were fighting against Muslim invaders, and they won. And so, that's a pretty important bit of detail to have for today's celebration. I was disappointed that the Catholic school they went to did not explain any of that. And my kids are of different ages, but I at the very least would have expected social studies or the teachers in my oldest, who's in 6th grade, to be able to explain that in like 2 minutes. Like, it's really not hard to explain. But it also emphasizes where the feast day comes from. But I hope that answered it. So let's see. I've always understood proselytizing as being like aggressive, like a street preacher calling people out, not someone just speaking up to correct an error they've heard someone say. Right. So like so right. So like there's an example of if you went to I went to Michigan State for my undergrad, and there are these we called them the Wells Hall preachers. What they would do, it was a public spot, and it was the math it was the public spot on campus, which I'm not going to go into the detail of public spots on campus, but they're right in front of the math building, and they are out there and they're calling everybody, anybody and everybody everything. Like, you're going to hell if you do X, Y, and Z. You're going to hell if you do this. You're going to hell if you're Catholic. You're going to hell if, like, all this stuff. And it's that is proselyte. Like, if I had to, exactly what Starscombe said, if I had to think of proselytization, that's it. Because that is aggressively attacking people. Like, it's one thing to say, hey man, I really care about you. Me and you have been friends for a while. I really care about you. If you keep doing this, you're going to end up in hell. Like, if you keep doing this, like, I'll pray for you, but like, I'm really concerned about your soul. Okay. Like, that is a very different thing than saying, hey, you're going to hell because you're Catholic. You're going to hell because your shorts are too short. You're going to hell because you listen to rock music. I'm not kidding. Like, stuff like that was said. Like, that was like, and a lot of students who went to Michigan State witnessed that. And it's borderline harassment. Like, because it is. Like, you're in front of a building that people have to go to, and you're yelling at them in a fairly unjust manner. Like, you're not simply telling them about the gospel, you're outright condemning them. And that is a very different thing. Like, when you look in the like, I think a great example of this as like a counter to this is like when you look in the gospel, or I'm sorry, when you look in the at St. Paul, and where he argued on the Hill of Philosophers in Athens. Like, that's great. Like, you should do that. You should argue your case if you feel called to do so, and he absolutely did. But like, that's a very different thing than just going out and saying to those philosophers, you're going to hell or whatever. I mean, because like, their response would be like, what's hell? What's this? What are you talking about? Like, why are you yelling at us? Like, I mean, it's essentially like you come off as a crazy person if you do that. But if you intellectually meet someone there, or emotionally meet someone there, that's a completely different thing. Which is why in the example that I gave, where it's like, all right, hey, like, you're my friends, like, these actions, like, are grave sins and they could lead you to hell. Like, saying that to a friend is loving. It's good. You care about the person, and there's a relationship there. There's not a relationship between you and the random guy yelling at you saying you're going to hell. So like, that's whatever. That's a tangent. I guess it's not a tangent. It does answer, like, it gives a vivid example to what Starscombe said. Got a definition. Proselytizing is actively trying to convert them, not simply sharing the faith, which is evangelizing. Evangelizing is offering a cookie. Proselytizing is shoving it in their mouth. Okay. Where did you get that definition from? Okay. So while that's being looked at. So by and large, when it comes to the media, like, I don't know, this has always been really weird to me, is that we know that the media sways people, right? Like, not necessarily coerces people, but influences them greatly on the facts they know. And it's always been weird to me how major Catholic movies like haven't really been well, haven't really been made. Like they've been like except for one. And the funny thing is like okay, so like Mel Gibson is not like a like I have no idea where he's at in terms of his position as a like Catholic. I don't know if he's in good standing or not because like he comes from a very nuanced like belief system. Um I don't know, I don't think it's sedevacantism, but it's something else. And the fact like the fact that he was very thorough in what he was getting in that movie really shows his testament to trying to make a very authentic movie. And props to him. But like um it's really weird that we don't have that push within Catholic circles with a good bit of money behind it. Now, like the only thing I can think of is the fact that like we have dioceses suffering from, the very common problem of lawsuits for the various things that have happened over the last like 70 years. Divine Mercy website. Okay. So, okay, cool. That's nice to know. So, okay, so I'm trying not to make this super long. Okay, so I summarized the page on it and the metaphor is mine, but yeah. So I try not to make this super long. So I do plan on doing at least 2 live streams a week now, back to what I did. So it'd be like Monday and then Friday or Saturday. This Friday, I do plan to put out the video for religious sisters because there has been a religious sister drop since 1965 from approximately 180,000 to about 30,000 today, which is a much steeper drop than the priests that went from approximately 60,000 to like 33,000 today. So, oh, well, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. But like like that goes for like other videos too. So like, for example, I really want to bring out what Kara does and put it more in the spotlight, or other not just Kara, but other things where it points out like, hey, we as a church are like we're suffering in this part of the body, or we're suffering in this part of the body, or the kingdom isn't being promoted here in this way. Like because all that matters. Like we know that when it comes to like evangelization, like we're having a tough time. Like we seem to have like a really like internally there seems to be a fight, right? Like it's a soft fight. It's not a hard fight. Um, um, where like I'll go to one place where I worship. So I'll go to St. Basil's, my parish. I go to someplace else, completely different mass. Like the mass just feels completely different. It's valid. I'm not going to say it's not valid, but it feels completely different. And it's not that far away. It's in the same area and demographic of the people. Why is this happening? And so, like this idea of like we cater to every single nuance where the mass is almost indistinguishable from others is like a real problem. And yeah. So I'm not going to go off that right now, but it's just understanding that we need to, right. Like Kara is such an underrated organization. And I think a lot of dioceses do use them, but I don't know if they use them effectively. Because I'm like the diocese, and especially the archdiocese, does a lot of things. And I'm not going to like say like they're not doing enough. They're doing a lot. And it's just a matter of like when you have so much on your plate, when you try to like focus on like, all right, what's an effective tactic to bring in more priests into the, into ordination, like more boys to ordination. Like the idea of, for example, and what the video will be about, I'll give you a date when I actually like work more on it, because I want it to look good. But it's, when I eventually post that out, it's just the idea of saying only boys for altar servers. You're going to get a backlash from a group of people. You're going to get a backlash from some boomers. You're going to get a backlash from some modern people who are our age. You're going to get a backlash from some women. And that's okay. Because right now we're in a priest crisis. And so there are certain moves that require courage, but also some convincing. Because right now, when you have a whole bunch on your plate, it's really hard to pick what you need to eat as opposed to just what's available, right? Like you don't know what's the most nutritious necessarily when you just have a bunch on your plate. You just have a bunch of food on your plate. You need to finish it, right? Like that's kind of like the mentality here. And I can sympathize with that because they're in charge of a whole bunch of things. So I totally yeah. So like I totally get that. But before I make this way too long, I'm gonna get off. I will be putting in the comment section the donation for the bells. And if you have any questions on statistics you would like to look at or analyze, or if you want me to have a thorough explanation as to why this should be understood this way as opposed to that way, like please send them. I'd be happy to go over them. I think it's a lot of fun, but at the end of the day, I also think it's very helpful to the church. So I will talk to you guys later, and thanks for joining me.